Back in 2014 when it started airing, I loved The Flash. Now granted, that could be because I was in the exact right demographic for this show at the time, but I'd also like to think that the show itself was pretty good. Even now, I gotta recognize that the first couple seasons of this show were really fun. And now, here we are. 9 years later, 9 seasons later. I've seen every single episode of The Flash, and I've gotta say, this show is not good. I think this show suffers from a set of very explainable problems, and since I had to suffer through them for 9 seasons, now you do too. Any discussion of this show's problems has to start with the stakes. The show really has no meaningful stakes, and what I mean by that is nobody ever dies, nobody ever has serious long-term consequences imposed on them by the plot, and anytime someone does have what looks like it's going to be a really consequential thing happen to them, it's usually undone extremely quickly. So like a great example of this is at the end of Season 3. In the Season 3 finale, Barry has to go into this prison to stop the world from being destroyed, basically. And so there's a big emotional farewell at the end of the episode where he's saying goodbye to all of his loved ones.
This isn't fair. We're supposed to have our happy ending. I'm ready to see Iris what's done.
And you always will be. But you need to keep living your life. Keep growing. Keep loving. Keep running. From me.
Everyone's crying, and then in Season 4, Episode 1, they bring him back in 36 minutes. They undo all of that emotional buildup in 36 minutes of the next episode. In the exact same episode, in the finale of Season 3, Caitlin decides, oh, now that I have these Killer Frost powers, I gotta leave the team for a while and really go find myself.
I don't have a home.
Yes, you do, Caitlin. You do, with your friends. With me.
I'm sorry, Julian. I'm not Caitlin anymore.
You're not Killer Frost.
No, I'm not. I'm something else. And I need to figure out what that is on my own.
Hey.
Cisco, let me go.
And then in Season 4, Episode 1, she comes back. She comes back to the team in the first episode of the new season. But I think probably the most egregious example of this is in Season 6, where... Okay, wait, this is going to take some explaining. In Season 6, the CW did their big Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, which they had been foreshadowing since Season 1 of The Flash. In Season 1, there's this newspaper headline. It says that The Flash is going to vanish during Crisis, and he's never going to be seen again. So it's basically fated that Barry is going to die during this crisis. And Season 6's first half, which leads up to the crossover, they spend the entire first half of the season solely focused on Barry is going to die in this crossover. Barry is going to die in this crossover. All of the emotional development for every character is basically centered on getting them ready to move on without Barry. And then, during the crossover, through like a weird loophole, a different Flash is allowed to just step in and make the sacrifice for Barry so he doesn't have to die so he can go back and be with his family.
This is what I've been running towards all these years. It's time for Flash to vanish in Crisis.
A few moments later.
Nobu said the Flash must die in Crisis. He never said which one.
And then after that, they never talk about it again. It's like, how are you going to spend the entire first half of the season where the only character development you're doing is centered around Barry dying in this crisis, and then he just doesn't? That is like the antithesis of setup and payoff. These examples that I've talked about show you that the creators of the show are afraid to have any kind of lasting consequences from the plot, and that just makes the show kind of feel more and more meaningless as time goes on. And as if it weren't enough that no long-term consequences seem to stick, the showrunners made this bizarre choice in the middle of the show to start showing the future, to start showing Barry's children, and I don't know whose idea that was in the writer's room, but showing the future, showing his children, completely ruins any stakes that are left in the show because I obviously know that everything's going to be fine. You're showing me his kids. And I feel like that's such a critical mistake in a show where most of what I'm worried about is like, will the main character make it through whatever peril he's in currently? And the answer is obviously and always yes. How do I know? Because you showed me his children that he has in the future. So obviously he's going to survive whatever's in front of him. I think it was just a really dumb decision to do that. It's like, why are you telling me the middle of a narrative when I already know how it's going to end? Even the minute-to-minute stakes are basically totally eliminated because physical injuries are completely meaningless in this show. And that's a really bad choice to make as a creator when a lot of your show revolves around like fight scenes and physical danger that your characters are in. Barry will get smacked around and knocked all over the place, but because he has speed healing, he always just heals whatever damage that's been done to him instantly, so you're never worried about him actually getting hurt. Other team members will suffer like actual injuries in battle, and then they'll just spend like 2 scenes in the hospital and just wake up and be fine. There's a great example in the last season where this girl, Allegra, gets blasted with like an energy beam and flies backwards into this steel pipe, and the pipe bends when she hits it, and then she's fine, like 2 scenes later.
Oh, hey. Wait.
Just don't understand. She's not waking up.
Yeah, because she shattered her spine.
I've finished analyzing Allegra Garcia's symptoms. She appears to be suffering from acute radiation syndrome.
She appears to be suffering from having her fucking spine shattered. And then she's just fine. She's just fine. She just needed to walk it off, basically. The show constantly invents magic solutions to their problems, usually in the form of some kind of pseudoscientific babble or like hacking. The amount of times that Cisco hacks into something that he has no right to be able to hack, I think the people who write for this show think that hacking is when something runs on electricity and you can then manipulate it to do whatever the fuck you want it to do. There'll be at least one instance in every episode where like the team needs to find someone or like get into a place, and then the tech character will be like, I hacked into the building, or like I used the satellite to find the guy. And beyond just being stupid, I think the over-reliance on hacking actually really undermines a critical part of the show's sort of world building, which is having your characters find interesting solutions to like realistic logistical problems can be really interesting to watch. And I feel like by essentially giving your characters an easy out every time they come across a problem, oh, we'll just use hacking to solve this problem, you kind of prevent the audience from getting to see how these characters can solve problems creatively. Embracing logistical problems like that and finding clever and creative ways for your characters to solve them is a really good way to show your audience how your characters are resourceful and intelligent. But they choose to forgo that in favor of, like...
Maybe we can work around the multiplexed burst model channels and the inter-SV handoffs. We've got eyes and ears.
It also is really difficult to take any of the danger seriously in the show because Barry can solve 99% of the problems in every episode just by using his fucking superpowers, but for some reason, he stops to talk to every bad guy, which makes the stakes feel so much lower because it feels like even he is not particularly worried about the danger that's right in front of him.
Last chance. Where's my dad?
Josh, you know we can't give him up.
Then you know what happens next.
Josh, I deceived you, okay? Not them. You want to make someone pay? It's me.
This is how you make heroes pay!
Have you considered using your fucking superpowers? But the problems with the writing go much further than just the stakes. My biggest critique of the writing is that I think the writers think too little of their audience and too much of themselves. The writers definitely think that this audience is stupid and needs every single thing explained to them step by step. There are a lot of episodes where they will flash back to a scene that happened like 1 scene ago, as if like I don't have the object permanence to recall something that happened 30 seconds before. A lot of times characters will explain out loud how they feel instead of using, good acting and clever dialogue to kind of just show us that. You can also tell that the writers think that they're extremely cool and extremely progressive based on the way that they write their minority characters. A CW writer's idea of good representation is characters saying out loud how strong and empowered they are.
We got this. We're strong women.
And it's like, if you really care about representation, then you should take the time to actually write good characters with those minority attributes. Because you spend so much time patting yourself on the back for being so thoughtful as to include all these different identity groups that you forgot to actually write them in a strong and compelling way. And what you end up with is not a bunch of strong minority characters, but just legitimately a collection of caricatures. I think there's no better example of this sort of caricaturing than in the episode Girls' Night Out in season 4.
The police are on their way. We did it, guys. We really did it. Actually, it's girls.
They think that writing that is empowering. It's just embarrassing.
Hashtag feminism.
Yeah. Hashtag feminism. Hashtag feminism. Hashtag feminism.
I promise you, if you feel the need to say hashtag feminism out loud 4 times in an episode, what you've written is the opposite of feminism.
Because we live in a society that's dictated by the male gaze.
She said we live in a society? One of the most obvious problems with this show is there are just way too many characters. There's so many side characters, and some of the directions they took these side characters in are just completely beyond my comprehension. Let's do a dumb side character lightning round really quick. You got Joe. Joe starts out this show so strong. He's Barry's adoptive father, and at the beginning, he has a really good dynamic with Barry where he's like worried about Barry taking on all this danger and becoming the Flash, but he also wants to help him because he knows Barry can do a lot of good. And there is some really good stuff between Barry and Joe in the first season. I really like his character, and I think Jesse L. Martin, who plays Joe, does a great job. But as the series goes on, Joe loses his purpose on this show to the point where at the end, he's literally just inserted into episodes to give Barry these like inspirational pep talks. Like he kind of loses all of his own agency as a character and just starts hanging around Star Labs, waiting in the wings whenever Barry needs to get cheered up before a big fight at the end of the episode. Caitlin was another character who started out with sort of a really interesting direction and then completely lost her way as time went on. At the beginning of this series, Caitlin is mourning the loss of her fiancé who dies in the same particle accelerator explosion that gave Barry his powers. So the whole season is about her learning to cope with the loss of her fiancé until about the midway point in the season where they resurrect her dead fiancé, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, so now I guess she doesn't have to worry about that. And then they kill him off at the end of the first season or maybe the beginning of the second season. And then Caitlin herself begins to develop metahuman abilities and becomes Killer Frost. At first, it's kind of like the Hulk, where like she'll just kind of lose control and become Killer Frost. But then throughout the course of the seasons, Killer Frost becomes like an alternate personality for her, where like sometimes Killer Frost is in control of her body, and sometimes Caitlin's in control of her body. And then in the middle of like the 7th or 8th season, they separate the two of them. They become two separate people who are on the same show. And then Killer Frost gets killed off for absolutely no reason. And then Caitlin gets killed off for absolutely no reason. And instead, she's replaced with this character, Kion, who has Caitlin's face and body, but is actually the Earth goddess who can manipulate all forms of nature and all natural life. It's like, how the fuck did we get here? Dude, at one point in the 9th season, this is a couple episodes before the finale, this dude, Mark, is possessed by this crystal. That's not really important right now. Kion, in order to get the crystal out of this guy, disintegrates him, literally turns him into dirt, takes out the crystal, and then puts him back together from dirt into a human being, and there are no consequences to that whatsoever. The dude is completely fine. And it's like, how the fuck, what problem can that set of powers not solve? She can literally just reverse death, apparently. How are there going to be any stakes going into this finale at all? And just when I thought the Caitlyn story arc couldn't get any stupider than it already had, in the finale, they make this baffling decision to have Kion ascend into godhood, and when she does that, Caitlyn's body is just left behind, and Caitlyn's just back again. For 10 minutes at the end of the finale, Caitlyn just comes back after being gone the entire season and replaced with Kion. I think the writers must have been smoking handfuls and handfuls of crack when they wrote Caitlyn's story arc, because this makes no fucking sense to me at all. Harrison Wells. Oh boy. We'll talk more about Harrison Wells in a second when we talk about the villains, but as a character, Harrison Wells was the gift that keeps on giving for these showrunners. So in the first season, Harrison Wells is the villain. We're going to talk about him because he is easily the best villain on the show, hands down. But then, because the show takes place in a multiverse, they just keep using different forms of Harrison Wells over the years, and the same actor plays him every time. I think Tom Cavanaugh might have like killed a guy or like maybe committed some kind of serious crime, and only the CW knew about it, so they blackmailed him to keep him on the show. That's really the only logical explanation I can find for how he managed to stay on the show so long. So in season 1, he's Harrison Wells. In season 2, they bring in Harry Wells from Earth 2. He's kind of like the grizzled, grumpy veteran Harrison Wells, but underneath that cold exterior, there's a lovable guy under there. And then in the 3rd season, they bring in this guy, H.R. Wells. H.R. Wells is a bumbling fool who it turns out actually has no idea what the fuck he's doing and only pretends to know what he's talking about so he can get material to write books about. And then they kill off H.R. Wells at the end of season 3, and Harry Wells comes back for season 4. Then in season 5, they bring in this guy, Sherlock Wells, who is a French Sherlock Holmes version of Harrison Wells. And you might be asking yourself, well, Tom Cavanaugh doesn't have a French accent, so how did they get around that? And the answer is, they didn't. They just make him do this terrible French accent. Then Sherlock Wells gets killed by an antimatter wave in season 6, and then they bring in Nash Wells, who is like Indiana Jones Wells, because I guess at the end of the show, they just decided they were done making each Wells like their own unique person and they just started to borrow like other action characters. Captain Jack Sparrow Wells could not have been more than 3 seasons away. There was also this guy Ralph Dibny. He was like a big deal in season 4, and you could tell that the showrunners were trying to make him more and more a part of the story as the series went on. Like at one point, I'm pretty sure in season 6, they do a whole episode with a subplot about his mom. He was really becoming more and more integral to the plot, and then they just unceremoniously fired him in the middle of a season because I think they found some of his racist tweets. So the effect is that he just feels really out of place in this show. So in the middle of season 7, they introduced this guy, Mark. He was just supposed to be like a love interest for Killer Frost. I think they hired this guy because he has a 6-pack, because he takes his shirt off way too fucking much on this show, and his like superhero costume eventually is just like an open vest. He looks like the Greg Heffley. What was their company called? VIP Lawn Service. That's what it was. Cecile. Oh boy. Cecile is literally my least favorite character on the show, I think. She starts out this show as a district attorney who Team Flash have a couple run-ins with whenever they interact with the legal system. Then she becomes a love interest for Joe. Then while she's pregnant with her and Joe's kid, she develops telepathic abilities. And Team Flash is like, oh, that's just a side effect of the pregnancy. When you stop being pregnant, those powers will go away. But then she gives birth to the kid and keeps the powers. And then as the seasons go on, her powers just get more and more undefined to the point where by the middle of season 6 or 7, she has empathic abilities, which just means that she can read people's minds, know exactly what they're feeling, basically just kind of get any information that the plot needs her to have at any point. And then by the end, she develops telekinesis and she fights with Team Flash like as a superhero. And oh my god, there is a subplot with her and Joe and their daughter that the writers made so unbelievably fucked up, and I don't think that they realized how fucked up it was. So in the middle of season 9, Cecile and Joe are kind of thinking about leaving Central City so they can have a safer place to raise their daughter. But Cecile is, such a great, valuable asset to Team Flash that she knows that the city needs her too. And so the writers thought that a good solution to this problem is Joe just says to her, hey, I've got a great idea. How about I just take our daughter and move out to the country and you stay here in Central City and we'll see you on the weekends.
Well, then what are we supposed to do?
You come to the country on the weekends.
And she's like all about it, dude. She's like, oh, that's such a great idea. I just love you so much. And they're just like laughing and giggling at each other.
We have a plan. I love you. I love you so much.
It's like, homie, he literally just divorced you. He literally took your kid and was like, I'll see you on the weekends. And you're just like laughing and smiling about it. And the crazy thing is, I actually thought that maybe they would take that in an interesting direction. At one point during the final arc, Cecile learns that in the future, she only sees Joe and their daughter twice a year. And she's like horrified by this. She's like, oh my god, like, am I making the right choice? And for a while, I was like, holy shit, they might actually turn this around and like make her have some interesting character developments. And then a pep talk from Chester where he's like, no, it'll be fine. You'll always put your family first. Don't worry about it. And she's like, okay. And that's all it takes to resolve that subplot. So yeah, the writer's great solution to I don't have enough time to take care of my family and be a superhero was just fuck your family, just be a superhero, I guess. The daughter that you brought into the world who needs parents to take care of her? Yeah, that doesn't matter. It's way more important that you hang around with Team Flash instead. It's all about your dream. It was just the most selfish and backwards resolution of that storyline. Cecile is just so baffling to me because it's like, there were a lot of characters on the show that the writers just like ran out of things to do with, but Cecile was a character that it's like they invented her to do nothing with, and then they just kept reinventing her to do different nothings with her over the entire course of the show, and it never made any sense. This concludes our dumb side character lightning round. And the problem with having so many meaningless side characters is that it really cuts down on your ability to tell a good story about your main characters. When you have so many characters crammed into a finite amount of time, there's just not that much time to spend on your main characters anymore, and so all of a sudden your show feels like it's about nobody. And that's really what this show feels like at the end. At the beginning of this show, it was Barry, his story carrying the plot, like what's happening to this guy. And as they added more and more side characters, the Flash became less and less prevalent, to the point where there are full episodes in seasons 7, 8, and 9 where Barry is just not in them. He's just not in the episode. And it's like, what am I watching this show for? Granted, I could have asked myself that question a long time before finishing the show, but here we are. And while I think the huge number of side characters is a really big problem with the show, the main characters and the villains are just as much to blame as far as why it doesn't work. The villains really degrade from like interesting in the first 2 or 3 seasons to absolute cartoon in the last couple seasons. This show hits you with Harrison Wells, the Reverse Flash in season 1, and he is the only good villain because he is the only one with an actual motivation that makes sense, that is personal to him. I actually have to give them so much credit for how good this was. In season 1, you find out that Harrison Wells, the Reverse Flash, is the one who killed Barry's mom, and after doing so, he found himself cut off from his powers. He couldn't get back home. And so the only way for him to get back to his time period was to actually create the Flash, so that he could have somebody who could run fast enough to open a portal in time and take him back to where he wanted to go. So he spends years and years meticulously planning to create the Flash. Isn't that really awesome? I remember I loved that when I saw it for the first time in 2014, and rewatching it to make this video, I was like, yeah, that's really good, because it actually establishes that he wants something that is greater than just power or greater than just domination, control over the world. He has a personal motivation, go home, and he has spent years planning meticulously to see that goal completed. None of the other villains even come close to that level of personal motivation. The vast majority of the other villains on this show, their only motivation is to get more power. With all the speedsters, it's like they want to be the fastest speedster, or they want to take Barry's speed so they can have all the speed in the world. And the number of villains on the show who are speedsters, it was just egregious. It was like every season there was a new speedster villain who would just wanted to run faster than ever before. The only other villain who even came close to being interesting was the Thinker, who, before they kind of fucked him up at the end of his arc, was really interesting. This was a supervillain with enhanced intelligence, and for a while it was really like kind of unclear what he wanted in a good way. It was very mysterious. You didn't really know like what his big plan was, but by the time they actually got around to writing what his plan was, it turns out he wanted to wipe the minds of everybody in the world so he could like start anew, and that involved him accumulating all these meta powers besides super intelligence, so that by the end he was just this accumulation of a bunch of different powers. It was really stupid. The writers of the show think that getting more power is like a relatable or interesting motivation for a villain, and they're just wrong, and that's why so many of the villains in the show just don't work. And at the beginning of the last season, they introduced the villain Red Death, who is an evil Batwoman who is a speedster. And I feel like I cannot understate how badly they fucked this up. You had the infinity of directions to take evil Batwoman in, and this is what you chose.
But soon, I will have eyes and ears everywhere. I will be the judge, jury, and executioner. No, this can't be happening. Ruined it all. I will bring justice to this world!
I can't believe they had a chance to use such an interesting interpretation of a character and they wasted it on something this bad. Also, a smaller point in comparison to, the overall problems with motivation, but every one of these villains has like a weird voice changer sound effect put over their voice, and I think that the creators of the show thought it would be like intimidating or like mysterious, but it really kind of sounds like they're speaking through one of those like Party City voice changers.
You can't beat yourself. I know everything you're going to do before you do it.
What? I can't fucking understand what you're saying.
Flash! That was nuts! You do like to party!
I don't think I've ever been less intimidated, frankly. Hey, it's me editing this video. I found this clip from season 5 while looking for background footage to use in this video, and it made me laugh super fucking hard, so now you have to see it too.
Every meta will die.
But in addition to the underwhelming villains, the main characters, who you would think would drive the plot and the development of the show forward, feel like they don't change at all. From the end of season 1, Barry does not change. The showrunners want you to think that he's changing, and Barry is constantly, quote-unquote, learning, but he is never actually changing or growing as a character. And that is kind of the worst of both worlds, because 1, he's not changing, so we don't actually get to see him like go through anything interesting as a character, and 2, the creators made a very odd choice to kind of always have him be learning lessons at the end of episodes, and when you do that for such a long runtime of a show, it kind of feels like by the end, he should kind of be what you are making him grow into, if that makes sense. Like, the point of learning all those lessons should be that by the end, he's like a fully realized, fully confident character who can actually do like what the story wants him to do. But even at the end, it feels like he's always just learning stuff and getting pep talks. It's like he's been doing this for like a decade or more at this point. Shouldn't he kind of be an established hero by now? And I want to be clear, growth and learning are important aspects of a character arc, especially at the beginning of a story. But at some point, a character has to stop growing because they've finally grown into the character they're supposed to be. A big problem with there being way too many characters is that the number of characters on the show is not proportional to the conflicts between those characters. A lot of times on the show, characters will form groups. Like a great example of that is Team Flash, for example, which is like a group of all the main heroes. But there will very rarely be any conflict between the members of those groups. The characters all act according to the team's motivation instead of their own personal motivation. And I feel like that really ignores one of the only possible upsides to having this many characters. When you have this many characters, you have a very unique opportunity to make them all have very different and conflicting personal motivations. That creates really natural tension between them. But the creators of the show don't do that. They're always on the same page with each other. They're very rarely at odds. They're very rarely in disagreement. And that makes it extremely stagnating, extremely bland and boring to watch. When all your characters are doing nothing but agreeing with each other, it sort of gives the impression that they're kind of just one character in multiple bodies. The best parts of this show are the parts where there is actual conflict between the members of Team Flash. But another big problem is anytime there is any actual conflict between characters, it's usually really contrived. And what I mean by that is there are very, very few episodes where two characters are actually in conflict and both of them have sensible positions. Usually one of the conflicted parties will have a motivation that is just completely unreasonable. There's this part in season 5 where Barry and Iris are disagreeing with each other about whether to trust their daughter who's come back from the future because they've just found out their daughter in the future is working with the Reverse Flash. And Barry doesn't want to trust her because he knows the Reverse Flash is the one who killed his mom and is very prone to manipulating people, so they probably can't trust her if she's working with him. And Iris just refuses to even see the wisdom in that point of view and takes the opposite side. And it's like, I don't understand how a reasonable person could believe what you believe, so this conflict doesn't feel real, it just feels totally contrived.
You think I wanted to do this? That this was easy? Seeing Nora, looking at me, asking for forgiveness, knowing that it might be the last time I ever see her?
What about the last time that I get to see her, Barry? I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye.
Damn it, Iris, she lied to us for months!
And she explained why.
That she was working with Dawn?
That doesn't bother you.
No, it doesn't.
Hey dog, you know that guy killed his mom, right?
She just wanted to meet you, Barry. The father that she never knew, and there is one person who could teach her how to do that. Is it really so hard to understand why she would go to him?
Doesn't matter if I understand it. Thawne is manipulating her.
And what's worse is that sometimes there is conflict and it's not contrived, but every time that there is not contrived conflict, it's resolved in one episode. The writers are so afraid to just leave a bit of that tension to actually like push the characters in a new direction and like have them be angry at each other for long periods of time, because the status quo of this show is everything reverts back to normal at the end of the episode. And so a lot of times there will be tension for one episode and at the end they'll be like, oh, you know, I forgive you, it's fine. And so it's really hard to convey their feelings of frustration or anger at each other because they're willing to just fucking get over it so easily. There's an episode in season 8 where Caitlin cannot bring herself to get over the fact that Killer Frost is dead and gone. And so she is trying to use like some kind of bullshit magic science to bring Killer Frost back to life. And Barry discovers what she's up to, and he's like, this is a bad idea. You shouldn't be doing this. This is dangerous. And Caitlin, won't listen to him. And so at the end of that episode, Barry uses his powers to destroy her lab, to just ruin all of her equipment and make it so that she can't bring Killer Frost back to life. And I was like, oh shit, this is some actual conflict between these characters. Like, surely she's going to be pissed about this and not forgive him super easily. No, at the end of the next episode, she just forgives him. There's no more conflict. I want to talk in depth about one specific episode of this show because I think it illustrates basically everything that I've said about conflict. It shows you the potential that the show could have if it used conflict well, And by the end, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about how not to manage conflict. It's season 4, episode 7, called Therefore I Am. So this episode starts with Barry and Joe investigating this guy, Clifford DeVoe, who they think might be the big bad of this season, the Thinker. And as they talk to him, as they interview him, there are little details that DeVoe is talking about that Barry is noticing from DeVoe's house that are making Barry think this guy is probably the main villain of the season. But nobody else believes him. Everyone else thinks, oh, this is just some mild-mannered dude. He's obviously not the Thinker. We shouldn't suspect him. And Barry is the only one on Team Flash who actually thinks, no, this is probably the villain.
This DeVoe guy could be behind everything. The bus meta is me coming out of the Speed Force at the wrong place. The Samuroid.
Barry, is there a possibility that you were so determined to find the bad guy and get ahead of everything that you're seeing things exactly the way you want to see them?
No. Maybe, I don't.
And so throughout the episode, despite the warnings of his team, despite the fact that DeVoe eventually takes out a restraining order against him, Barry defies his team and goes and investigates this guy. He breaks into DeVoe's house at one point to try to find evidence that he's the Thinker. And the rest of the team thinks he's just being paranoid, that he's fought so many villains that all he can see now are villains and he can't understand this is just a normal guy.
He's been watching us for weeks, and I could have proved it, but his wife came back too soon.
Too soon? From where?
Wow.
Barry, tell me you did not break into their house.
Well,
Wow.
no,
Okay.
guys, no, that sounds bad. But you have to listen to me. This guy wants us to think he's unassuming and weak, but he's not. He is powerful and smart, and he's been ahead of us every step of the way. He's ahead of us right now.
Easy, Alan. Calm down.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Hey, we
what?
just don't want you to do anything else you'll regret.
Anything else? What do you mean? What have I done?
For starters, breaking and entering.
Oh my God, I don't understand why you don't see what's going on. He probably has cameras everywhere, at the lab, at CCPD. I mean, he's always watching us.
And the tension in this episode is so good because the members of Team Flash actually have different opinions. They're actually disagreeing with each other. Barry going behind his team's back to investigate this villain creates so much tension, not just whether or not he's going to get caught, but whether or not he can get his team to believe him. At the end of the episode, Barry confronts DeVoe with his suspicions that he is the Thinker, and DeVoe confirms them, and they have a really cool scene. It's actually like, DeVoe is like kind of mysterious, a little bit unsettling. Like, I really think this is one of the high points of the entire series.
Who are you, really?
Who's asking? Barry Allen? Or the Flash? You may be the fastest man alive, Allen. I'm the fastest mind. Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. I'll be thinking of you.
And then Barry goes back to his team, and he's like, hey guys, yeah, it turns out I was right the whole time. And they're just like, oh, okay, I guess you were right.
There's something I need to tell you. I confronted DeVoe.
Oh, come on, Barry. He could get you arrested.
No, he won't. He wanted me to come.
How do you know?
Well, for starters, he knows I'm the Flash.
So you were right all along.
We didn't believe you.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. DeVoe's been playing all of us.
And then everyone forgives each other, and there's no lasting consequences from that tension whatsoever. They resolve the tension in one episode just like they always do, and just like always, there are no lasting consequences to any of the conflicts. What a missed opportunity. And I think the reason that the writers are so afraid to employ conflict is that it's really hard to keep a show going for a super long period of time if your status quo is constant character change, constant character tension, because that's really hard to write well for a long period of time. Eventually, the plot will develop to a point where the conflict has to resolve one way or the other. And this show's goal is to just be on for as long as possible. And so that means adopting a status quo that doesn't involve tension, because it's way easier to just resolve the tension in every episode and just kind of revert back to the way things were at the beginning so that you can keep doing that over and over again forever. And this gets into what I think is sort of my biggest criticism with this show, is the length. This show is way too fucking long. And I kind of think that everything that I've been critiquing up to this point is a symptom of this problem. If you go on the Wikipedia page for the show and you look at the list of episodes for the later seasons, you're going to notice something immediately. And that is, this show breaks up its storylines into what it calls graphic novels, which are like 4 or 5 episode chunks about one thing, and then they go to a different topic. And on its face, that sort of looks like it would solve the problem of the 22 episode season. There isn't enough to tell a whole story over 22 episodes, so what if you told 4 or 5 stories? Okay, so there's something there. But you'll also notice that there are long stretches of episodes that they call interludes in between each of the graphic novels. That shows you right there are too many episodes in a season. They literally outline for you a set of episodes that they're like, yeah, this shit is not worth putting in a graphic novel, but we were on the hook for a certain number of episodes this season, so we had to throw some stuff in there. These kind of filler episodes also are extremely formulaic. There are probably 40 or 50 episodes of The Flash that play out the exact same way. Barry, you need to get to the scene of the crime. There's a bad guy there. I'm almost done committing crimes over here. I'm on my way, Cisco. I'm pumping my arms as much as I physically can. Well, time to leave since I'm basically done committing these crimes. Not so fast, you criminal. I'm here to make sure you don't get away with your crimes. Ah, holy shit, dude. It's a good thing you stopped. I would have had no shot at beating you. I mean, frankly, you could have just whisked me away to jail, and I probably wouldn't have even known you were coming after me. Your reign of terror ends now, you criminal. Oh yeah? Well, what do you say to this? What the hell are you doing right now? Dude, I'm blasting you with my powers. They're gonna add it in post. Oh, okay. Come on, you're getting hit right now. Oh, right. Oh, you got me. Now to make my getaway. Cisco, he's getting away. I'm gonna need some backup. Can't you run like 900 miles an hour? He's fleeing on foot. Just send me some backup. Hey Barry, what's going on? Ah, what the fuck? Who are you? You asked for some backup. Here I am. No, but like, I don't think I've ever met you before. Oh, come on, you know me. I'm Jimmy Jenkins. I'm the hot-headed young speedster you're gonna train this season. Oh, right. You're the one that the writers write off the show at the end of the season because you're not popular enough to be part of the main cast. Wait, what? Oh shit, I thought you already knew. Do I at least get to be on one of the spin-off shows where I'll join an entire roster of completely forgettable characters like me? I think I heard something about how you're gonna travel the Himalayas to find inner peace, which usually means we never see you again. Fuck. We don't have time for that right now. We gotta catch that criminal. Looks like the road forks up ahead. I'm pretty sure he went left. Unfortunately, in order to manufacture some tension, I think I'm gonna check the right. Ha ha ha, I went left the whole time, Flash. Oh, if only you had trusted your young protege. Ah, my head! No, I gotta get him back to Star Labs! Caitlin, he's in critical condition. Is there anything you can do for him? It could be tricky, Barry. If I had to guess, he's suffering from fibrillary glomerulonephritis. No, Caitlin, that's a kidney disease wherein fibril proteins plug the glomerulus, causing it to become inflamed. Oh, right. Well, in that case, my best guess is he's been shot in the head. Barry, I've uncovered some more information about our villain. What did you find? Using the data I recovered from your suit from your last encounter, I've been able to determine this guy generates all of his power from a solar cell implanted in his nipple. Gross. Which one? We can't know for sure. But I'm working on an upgrade for your suit so that if you punch him in the correct nipple, you'll inject him with a synthetic nanovirus that will turn his nipple's own enzymes against him, digesting him from within. That would be horrifying, and there's no way that could possibly work. I'll just punch him really hard instead. I'll install the upgrade just to be sure. So I guess we get another crack at this guy, huh? How are you alive right now? Ah, it was no big deal. Caitlin stitched me up real quick. She stitched up the gunshot wound in your head? Well, I wouldn't have had that wound in the first place if you had just trusted me. God, you're right. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm definitely in need of a pep talk. Oh, perfect. Joe's got like 6 or 7 left on his contract. You should give him a call. Hey, Barry. Let me guess, another pep talk? Joe, I just don't know if I can beat this guy. He's got all these powers and I guess I'm just having a lot of trouble trusting this new member of our team. Oh, Barry. People come into our lives for all sorts of reasons. Some teach us life lessons we never forget. Some nurture us and help us become better people. Some simply love us with all their hearts. And then there are people like you who do all those things and more. Oh, thanks, Joe. How do you always know exactly what to say? I mean, I feel better about me and this new guy already. You two have something really great together. Actually, you've got a lot of great things. Happy memories, a growing family, love, laughter, and a wonderful life. Well, I wouldn't say a growing family. I just met this guy like yesterday. I'm not sure that But the best thing you've got is each other, and that's really something to celebrate. Happy anniversary. This feels like it's getting less and less relevant to my current situation. Someone's turning 6, someone awesome and so cool, so armor up and celebrate. That 6-year-old is you, wishing you a day of invincible fun. Alright, I'm gonna hang up now. Well, it's getting pretty close to the end of the episode, and we still haven't caught the bad guy, so like, anybody have any ideas for how we can do that? Or what is that music that's playing right now? Oh, that's the emotional heart-to-heart music. It's time for us to share our true feelings with each other just in time to stop the bad guy. Yeah, we don't have to do that. I could probably come up with some ideas for like how we can... I'm sorry I haven't been trusting you guys lately. I know I've been really difficult to work with, and just a real... Oh, no, dude, it's okay, I totally forgive. It's just that this villain really reminds me of my mom, who died when I was just a little kid. And in what way does this dude remind you of your mom? You know, I think it all really started back in 2003 when my dad left to go get cigarettes. Jesus Christ. Hey Barry, it's me, Cisco. I think we got the location of the bad guy. He's at a warehouse in the shipping district. Good work, Cisco. Hey, how did you find this guy? I set the Starlab satellite to give me an alert anytime anyone exposed their nipple to the sky, and we just got a ping at the warehouse. Alright, let's suit up and go after him. Are we just gonna gloss over the fact that our satellite has the ability to track people's nipples? Like, did we have to get any kind of government approval? You know what, let's just go catch this guy. It's no use, Flash. Soon my nipple will be at full charge, and Central City will be mine for the taking. I gotta take out that nipple. But which one should I hit? It's probably the left one. But how can we know for sure? I don't know, man, I'm just guessing. No, you're right. I have to trust you. Yeah. Oh, the pain. Oh, the humanity. Well, it looks like you did it. Oh, God. It feels like my nipple is using its own enzymes to digest me from within. No, man. We did it. How could you possibly have known which nipple to hit? Easy. Because I trusted my teammate. Tune in next week where we air the exact same episode because you're all far too fucking dumb to even notice. The consequence of a show being too long is not just that there are full episodes that are completely meaningless. It's that the longer a show is, the harder it's going to be to stick the landing when it comes to telling interesting and compelling character arcs, because when we think about a character's arc, we think about all the stuff that happened in the middle as well. It sounds almost basic, but for a character arc to work, the beginning of the character arc has to inform the middle, and the middle has to inform the end. If you completely lose your way in the middle, the end isn't going to make sense. And I think this is weirdly something that I think applies to a lot of CW shows. They always start decently strong, because it's very hard to tell an origin story or the beginning of a character story without some idea of like the kind of story you want to tell about that character, without some concept for an arc you want them to go through. And that's why the first season of The Flash, the first couple seasons of Arrow, are pretty good, because there is a focused effort to tell the origin story for a character. But then once they get to the middle and they kind of leave the comfort of the rigid formula for origin stories and they actually have to make something of their own, they lose their way because they just spend so much time focused on making sure the show can go on for as long as possible that they don't spend any time actually telling a story about the character developing in organic and natural ways. And so by the time they get to the end, there's literally no direction for the character whatsoever, and the ending makes no sense given what we've seen at the beginning. And trust me, that is especially true of this finale. The finale for this show, I was literally screaming laughing by the end. I thought that they made a parody of this show and aired it as the finale. I expected the finale to be bad, but I did not think it was physically possible to make something this bad. I mean, let's just take it from the top. So at the very beginning, Eddie Thawne, who is the main villain of the whole thing now, he unites all the speedsters from the previous seasons to go take down the Flash one last time. And I was like, okay, that could be kind of cool. And then Team Flash and all these speedsters get in a line to fight each other and then decide to fight one-on-one or whatever. And all these speedsters who are the big bad villains of the seasons that they're villains from, they get absolutely one-shot by just rando side characters from Team Flash. At one point, Cecile starts flying. She never had the power to fly at any point in the show, and in the finale, she just starts flying. I'm firmly convinced that when they were green screening her character, doing whatever she was doing, they just forgot to anchor her feet to the ground, and so then her character's just floating around the screen. So yeah, Barry follows Eddie into the negative speed force to try to confront him, and the way that he defeats him is by just telling him that, he shouldn't be bad. He should just be good instead. He's like, Eddie, can't you see what you're doing is bad? And Eddie's like, okay. And then that's the end of the conflict. That was the whole... You remember how they spent 4 episodes setting up this conflict, and then they resolved it by just having them talk? I cannot emphasize enough how fucking hilarious it is that the final villain of this show, Barry is able to neutralize by just talking to him for 30 seconds. That is so fucking funny. So after Barry solves all their problems by just talking, the second half of the episode starts. Whereas in the first half, it kind of felt like nothing was happening. For some reason, in the second half, shit just starts flying at you from all directions. It's just absolutely off the wall. They're like, okay, Iris is having a baby, and Chester has metahuman powers now. Keone, it's time to ascend, all right? You got to ascend now. Keone ascends. Caitlyn is somehow left behind when she ascends, and now Caitlyn's back as part of the main crew. Barry's gonna throw a lightning bolt into the sky and create 3 new speedsters, and Joe and Cecile are gonna get engaged, and it's like they forgot that they were filming the last episode. They were like, oh shit, there's not gonna be any more episodes after this? We gotta do all this shit now. The fact that the show was so long meant that every character's arc went through this huge meandering path where the writers clearly had no idea what they wanted to do with those characters. And by the time we ended up in the finale, somehow they managed to absolutely flub the landing on every single one of them. I don't think a single character on this show has an arc that makes sense. And there's going to be some of you out there who say, I really don't care if the show's character arcs aren't satisfying. I'm just kind of watching it as a week-to-week comedy. And I actually think that the show being this long kind of undercuts its ability to be funny from week to week also. Because as the show goes on, the characters get less and less unique. Their dialogue, their personalities kind of all become more and more average. If you go back and watch season 1, Barry is a very unique character. His dialogue is different than anyone else on that show. He has different mannerisms than anyone else on that show.
It's a whole new way of looking at physics. It will literally change the way that we think about everything.
In season 1, Barry's dialogue feels pretty natural to his character, but by season 9, he delivers every line like it's a Shakespearean sonnet. He's always like staring dramatically into the middle distance and like uttering some kind of poetic recital.
There's always another way, and I'll help you find it. But right now, I need you to help me to defeat her by being the hero I know you already are.
It does not feel natural to his character at all, because somewhere in the 9 seasons, they lost that idea for how to make his character and his dialogue natural to him. It's the same thing with Iris. Iris in season 1 is a really fun character, and by season 9, she's just this completely bland, absolute nothing of a character. If you want to make a show about these wacky characters and their weekly hijinks, the characters still have to be unique and interesting and fun to watch. And as you write more and more, as you let the characters stagnate for longer and longer, they actually become less interesting even on a week-to-week basis. And again, I know that this is something that the writers have no control over. The network is the problem in this instance. The CW's model of TV is just totally outdated. Nobody wants a 22-episode season anymore. The reason that the last season is only 13 episodes is because they realized they just don't have enough stories to compellingly fill a 22-episode season. Even their 13-episode season was way too long. They have an interlude in their 13-episode season. To me, that sounds like you guys might have had like 6 episodes worth of stuff to tell. I think since the rise of streaming services, consumers just don't want the filler episodes that they were used to on sitcoms. I think they want sort of a more novelistic structure where every episode is a chapter of a story. Every episode is meaningful to the plot and the characters. The Flash is a fascinating show to me for several reasons. But most of all, this show is really interesting to me because I started watching this show at a time before I got really analytical about the kind of like TV and movies that I was watching. And I thought this was a really good show. And going back and looking at it and being able to sort of see what I couldn't see when I started it, it's sort of an interesting personal experience as well. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking about. See ya.